For 1,000 years, the galaxy had forgotten the taste of war. The Concorde's banners draped across star systems like a promise carved into light, binding races once sworn to mutual destruction. Entire generations lived and died without hearing the sound of weapons unleashed, believing conflict to be a relic consigned to dusty archives and whispered cautionary tales. In that fragile age, the very word war became abstract, something ancient, monstrous, but ultimately irrelevant. The shattering came not as a whisper, but a roar. The Zorith Dominion, long resentful of a Concorde's restraint, rose before the council and declared what no one else dared. The 1,000-year peace was over. The chamber erupted into disbelief, some envoys crying out as if struck. The treaties that had endured empires' rise and fall meant nothing now. To most, it was unthinkable. To the Zorith, it was inevitable. They boasted that the galaxy had grown weak and complacent, that their dominion would thrive where others had withered. Ambassador Celine Vose, humanity's voice within the Concorde, sat quietly among the storm of outrage. Her colleagues' faces were etched with dread. Scaled, feathered, furred, or smooth, all wore the same mask of fey. She studied them with sharp eyes, noting the tremor in their hands, the quiver in their voices. Then, as the Zorith warlord finished his tirade, she leaned back, and the faintest curve of a smile touched her lips. The reaction from her peers was immediate. A reptilian envoy recoiled, hissing in disbelief. "You find humor in this? Have you no reverence for the peace we've built?" Her reply was calm, her tone threaded with a dry amusement. "Peace," she said, "is not built by words alone. It is built by those strong enough to protect it." She let her gaze sweep the chamber, her smirk widening just enough to draw ire. "Perhaps you've forgotten. Humanity hasn't." Elsewhere, far from the pomp of the council, Admiral Kalen Drake received the declaration aboard his flagship. His officers reported the news in hushed tones, waiting for outrage or concern. Instead, Drake chuckled, a sound that carried like iron striking iron. His laughter was not cruel but fierce, a fire long banked finally allowed to breathe. "So the Zorith want war," he said, rising from his command chair. "Good. Let them learn what they've awakened." Drake was not a man of speeches, but every soldier on that bridge felt their blood quicken. They had trained for centuries in peace, drilled in maneuvers others considered obsolete, studied battle doctrines no other race bothered to preserve. To them, war was not a forgotten language, but a song humanity had practiced until their throats ached, even when no one else listened. Now the galaxy would hear it again. The Zorith Warlord King, a towering figure swathed in jagged armor, left the council chamber convinced of his triumph. To him, laughter was arrogance, a desperate bluff from an insignificant race. He believed the galaxy's fear confirmed his power. In his mind, humanity's mirth was the trembling of prey pretending to be predators. He carried himself with the certainty of a conqueror who had never tasted true resistance. Celine saw the truth differently. Humanity's laughter was not born of weakness. It was the echo of their history, wars that scarred their homeworld, revolutions that toppled tyrants, disasters that nearly ended their kind yet forged them into survivors. Where the rest of the galaxy had embraced peace by erasing conflict, humanity embraced peace by remembering it could always be broken. They carried the memory of struggle like a blade hidden beneath their cloak, sharp and ready. That was the heart of the conflict now revealed. The galaxy recoiled at the end of peace, while humanity leaned forward, unafraid. The council would beg for negotiations, plead for restraint, weep for the sanctity of treaties. But humans, long underestimated, only laughed. They knew something the others had forgotten, that survival was never guaranteed, and those who treated peace as eternal invited ruin. As the council session dissolved into chaos, Celine rose from her seat. She left without raising her voice, without defending humanity's reaction. Let them whisper, let them doubt. Soon, Drake and his fleet would speak in humanity's true language, and the galaxy would understand. That night, as she stood alone in her chambers, Celine allowed herself to think of Earth, its scarred history, its fragile beauty, its people who had thrived in the crucible of adversity. She whispered to the stars, as if to remind them, "We never feared war. We only feared forgetting." And far across the void, Admiral Drake watched as his fleet prepared for departure. His eyes gleamed with anticipation, not dread. The 1,000-year peace was broken, and humanity had been waiting for exactly this moment. The Zorith thought they had ended an age. They had no idea they had awakened one. The declaration reverberated across the stars, and the council wasted no time in cloaking their terror with ceremony. Emergency sessions stretched through endless hours, filled with anxious voices arguing over sanctions, peace envoys, and desperate compromises. To them, the thought of war was a nightmare reawakened. Yet among humanity, the response was different. The news reached Earth's colonies, space stations, and academies not with despair, but with a strange, unsettling mirth. Soldiers in waiting laughed in training halls, dockworkers grinned at one another as they hefted supplies, and cadets pored over strategy maps with renewed vigor. Humanity had lived with peace, but they had never trusted it to last. Now, the moment they had prepared for had come. Ambassador Celine Vos walked the council's great halls with practice poise, her figure a silhouette against the gleaming arches of alien architecture. She met with envoys whose faces betrayed unease at her calm. The Rulati, feathered and fragile, clutched their ceremonial staffs as though they might ward off war through ritual alone. The lit-hand delegation, tall and crystalline, refracted the chamber light in shivers that betrayed their agitation. Each one asked the same question in different words: why were humans not afraid? She answered with patience but never concession. Fear has its uses, she told the Rulati High Speaker, but it must never rule us. Humanity remembers what it costs to bow before it. To the lit hand, she said, we are not reckless. We are ready. There is a difference. And though her words carried reassurance, her eyes flashed with the sharpness of someone who knew they were also a warning. Elsewhere, Admiral Kalen Drake stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Resolute. The stars hung like cold lanterns, each one a battlefield waiting to ignite. Around him, officers worked with a discipline that belied their eagerness. They were young, many of them, yet their training was older than the Council itself. Humanity had never let war fade into legend. They had carried its lessons into every generation, drilling, simulating, and remembering. A junior officer approached, hesitant. Sir, may I speak freely? Drake inclined his head, his voice a rumble. Always. They call us mad, the officer said. The aliens, I mean. Laughing while the rest of the council grieves. They don't understand. Sometimes, he faltered, lowering his gaze. Sometimes I'm not sure I understand either. Drake studied him for a long moment before answering. Do you know why humanity laughs at war, Ensign? It is not joy. It is not madness. It is recognition. We laugh because we have met war before, and we survived. We laugh because our enemies think it is new to us, when it has been our companion since the beginning. His eyes returned to the stars. And we laugh because if we didn't, we might weep. The words settled over the officer like armor. He nodded, straight and now, as though reminded of a truth older than himself. Back in the council, Celine found herself cornered by the Zorith delegation, their armor glinting darkly under the chamber's light. The warlord's envoy sneered, ridges along his brow flexing with contempt. Your people are fools. Do you think laughter will shield you from our fleets? We will burn your colonies until your kind begs for the peace you mock. Celine met his glare with an unflinching calm. You mistake us. We do not mock peace. We honor it by remembering it is fragile. And when you come for us, you will find we are not the ones begging. The envoy hissed, but she was already walking away. News from the frontiers soon confirmed her words. The Zorith raided a border world held by another Concord race, expecting their strike to cripple morale. Instead, the human auxiliaries stationed there held firm, laughing as they manned the defenses, broadcasting taunts over open channels. Their resistance startled allies and infuriated foes. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy saw blood spilled not with tears but with defiance. In her private quarters, Celine studied the reports with a quiet dread she did not allow others to see. Outwardly, she was the voice of measured confidence, but inside, she understood the peril. Humanity's laughter, so misunderstood, was already reshaping how the Council saw them. To their allies, it was unsettling, even frightening. To their enemies, it was fuel for hatred. Yet she could not deny the truth. Humanity's laughter carried a promise that they would never bow, no matter how dark the storm. Meanwhile, Admiral Drake prepared his fleet for its first engagement. On the eve of battle, he addressed his officers not with flowery rhetoric but with simple, iron-bound words. "We do not fight because we love war. We fight because it is the price of living free. The Zorith think this is the end of peace. They are wrong. It is the beginning of their education." The officers answered not with solemnity but with smiles. Some even chuckled, a ripple of sound that spread across the chamber. It was not bravado. It was the release of something long held inside, a recognition that they were finally standing in the place for which they had been forged. Far away, the Zorith warlord read these reports with growing disdain. To him, laughter was weakness disguised as arrogance. He promised his people that humanity's mirth would die with their first defeat. Yet he could not shake a gnawing unease, a question he would not voice. What if their laughter was not a mask but a weapon? By the time the fleets began to move, the conflict was no longer merely between the Dominion and the Concord. It had become a struggle to define the very nature of survival. For the galaxy, war was unthinkable horror. For humanity, it was a test they had long awaited. And so the stage was set. As the Resolute led its fleet into the void, Admiral Drake's voice carried across the comms, steady and unyielding. "They wanted war. We will show them war. And when it's over, they'll understand why humanity laughs." The bridge fell silent, then someone chuckled softly. Another joined in, then another, until the sound swelled into a low, rolling chorus of mirth that spread through the ship like fire. On the eve of battle, humanity did not pray. They laughed. The frontier world of Eridan orbited a pale sun, its skies a mix of copper and violet. To the Zorith, it was little more than a soft target, a colony barely fortified, inhabited by species they considered weak. Their warlord had ordered the attack as a demonstration, a strike meant to cow the Concord and prove that humanity's laughter was nothing but bravado. But as their fleet descended, Admiral Drake's Resolute emerged from the void, accompanied by a formation of human warships that gleamed like steel predators in the star's reflection. The Zorith ships were larger, their hulls armored with plates scavenged from a dozen conquests. Their weapons hummed with brutal efficiency, designed to overwhelm by sheer volume of fire. Yet Drake's bridge officers moved with the precision of an orchestra, every command relayed in clipped tones, every adjustment executed with unwavering focus. Humanity's doctrine was not excess, but adaptability. Their vessels crafted less as blunt instruments and more as extensions of the crews that manned them. Enemy formation tightening, reported Ensign Lyra, her hands steady on the console. "They are trying to box us in." Drake leaned forward, his gaze locked on the tactical display. "Let them try. Bring us into the trough between their carriers. They'll expect us to hold back." A ripple of unease crossed the junior officers, but Drake's confidence settled them. Humanity had always thrived in the space between expectation and reality. With a gesture, he signaled the maneuver, and the Resolute surged forward, its engines roaring against the void. The first salvo came, lances of plasma streaking across the blackness. The bridge shook as the shields absorbed the brunt, shimmering under the assault. A lesser fleet might have faltered, but the humans pressed on, cutting through the barrage with surgical precision. Their weapons fired in coordinated bursts, not to overwhelm but to exploit, every volley striking where Zorith armor was weakest, every missile guided by intelligence honed over centuries of simulated wars. On the ground, Celine Vaux stood among Eridan's defenders, watching the skies split with fire. Her comm crackled with reports, the voices of soldiers and civilians alike holding steady despite the thunder above. She could feel the eyes of the other Concord envoys on her, searching for fear in her composure. She gave them none. "The Admiral knows what he's doing," she told them, her tone sharp enough to cut through doubt. The Zorith came expecting fear. Instead, they will learn why humanity is never cornered. High above, the Zorith commander snarled as human ships wove through his formation like knives through cloth. "Close the net," he bellowed to his subordinates. "Crush them before they scatter." But the humans did not scatter. They laughed. Open comms carried fragments of their voices, low chuckles, defiant grins hidden behind steel and helmets. It was unnerving to the Zorith, who had always used fear as a weapon. Here, their intimidation dissolved into fuel for their enemies. "Sir, flank squadrons ready." Lyra's voice broke through the hum of activity. Drake's lips curved into the faintest smile. Execute patent vengeance. The fleet split, human ships darting outward in sudden arcs, leaving gaps that looked like vulnerability. The Zorith surged forward to exploit them, only to find themselves funneled into crossfire. Human torpedoes streaked from hidden angles, detonating in synchronized blasts that ripped through Zorith carriers. Flames bloomed in the void, silent but devastating, as entire wings of enemy fighters disintegrated. The bridge erupted in restrained celebration, officers exchanging quick grins before returning to their tasks. Drake raised a hand, steadying them. Not yet. They'll throw everything now. He was right. The Zorith flagship charged, weapons blazing, its shadow dwarfing the Resolute. The two ships exchanged fire in brutal succession, shields straining, metal groaning under pressure. For a moment, it seemed as if sheer size might prevail. Yet humanity had never relied on size. Helm, cut velocity and roll us under their ventral arc, Drake commanded. Target their reactor conduits. The maneuver was insane by conventional doctrine, closing into the enemy's blind spot where one mistake meant annihilation. But the Resolute dug with precision, skimming so close to the flagship's hull that its plating scraped against the void. Turrets twisted to follow, but they were too slow. Human guns fired upward, piercing the flagship's underbelly, rupturing conduits with pinpoint strikes. The explosion was a silent blossom of light, a chain reaction tearing through the Zorith vessel. Alarms echoed across their fleet as the flagship split apart, fragments scattering like dying embers. Humanity's laughter rolled across the comms once more, no longer restrained but triumphant. On the ground, Celine watched the light bloom across the horizon. She did not smile, but her heart steadied. The envoys around her whispered in disbelief. For them, war was horror incarnate. For humanity, it was challenge met and overcome. The Zorith fleet, leaderless and in disarray, faltered. Some tried to retreat, others pressed on in desperation, but the outcome was inevitable. The Resolute and its sister ships dismantled them piece by piece, until the skies above Eridan burned with wreckage. As the last enemy ship fell silent, Drake stood on his bridge, his voice low but carrying weight. This is not the end. It is the beginning. They will come again, and we will be ready. Humanity has shown its hand, and now the galaxy will see us as we truly are. On Eridan, Celine received his transmission with the council envoys gathered around her. She let the words sink into the air before turning to them. The Zorith thought laughter meant weakness. Now they know it means defiance. What they learn next will depend on whether this council stands with us or against us. No one spoke, but the silence itself was heavy, full of realization and fear. The war had begun in earnest, and humanity had just rewritten the rules. The wreckage of the Zorith fleet still drifted in orbit above Eridan when the council convened in emergency session. Holograms of shattered warships hung in the chamber, like ghostly reminders of what had transpired, their burning hulls frozen in mid-detonation. For many, the images were proof that the Dominion could be resisted. For others, they were a source of deeper dread. If humanity could annihilate a warlord's flagship in their first engagement, what else might they be capable of? Ambassador Celine Vaux stood in the center of the chamber, her presence commanding without theatrics. She had not slept since the battle, yet fatigue only sharpened her resolve. The envoys questioned her in sharp, nervous tones, demanding explanations for humanity's unshaken resolve, for their laughter in the face of destruction. The Zorith underestimated us, she said, her voice cutting clean through the clamor. And so did you. Peace has lulled you into complacency, but humanity never allowed itself that indulgence. We trained. We remembered. And when the time came, we acted. A lit-hand delegate rose, crystalline facets shivering with unease. Your species fought with a ferocity that unsettled even your allies. That laughter, was it bloodlust? Celine's eyes narrowed. It was survival. It was the sound of a people who refused to kneel. Do not mistake discipline for savagery. The chamber quieted, though whispers rippled in the shadows. Some envoys were reassured. Others feared that humanity's fire would one day consume them all. Meanwhile, Admiral Kalen Drake stood aboard the Resolute, surveying the aftermath. Engineers moved like ants across the hull, repairing scorched plating and rewiring battered systems. He walked the deck slowly, speaking to crew members one by one. Their laughter had dimmed but not vanished. Now it carried a harder edge, tempered by loss. For every victory had its cost, and names of the fallen were already etched into memory. At the memorial alcove, he paused before the list of dead. A junior officer approached, voice hushed. "Sir, the crew wonders, what comes next?" Drake did not answer immediately. He stared at the glowing names, his silence heavy. When he finally spoke, it was with the gravity of one who knew he carried the weight of generations. What comes next is what always comes next. They will regroup. They will strike harder. And we will meet them again. Each battle will cost us, but we cannot turn aside. To do so would be to dishonor the peace we held for 1,000 years. The officer nodded, but his eyes lingered on the admiral, as though searching for cracks in his steel. There were none. Back on Eridan, survivors emerged from shelters, blinking up at the scarred skies. Children pointed at the wreckage glittering like false stars, their faces filled not with fear but with awe. To them, the humans were more than soldiers, they were protectors, beings who had stood laughing in the face of death and prevailed. Stories began to spread, carried by whisper and broadcast alike. Tales of human warships weaving through fire, of officers grinning as the enemy broke against them. The legend was already forming, and legends had power. Celine understood this as she walked the colony streets, her cloak brushing against cracked pavement. She listened to civilians recount their experiences, noting the way their voices steadied when they spoke of human defenders. The Concorde's people were not only frightened, they were awakening to the possibility that war could be faced without despair. Yet she also knew the danger. Inspiration could unite, but it could just as easily breed envy and fear. In the council chamber, she had seen the way some envoys looked at her, with suspicion, as though humanity's victory was a threat in itself. If the Concorde fractured now, the Zorith would not need to defeat them. They would collapse from within. That evening, she opened a secure channel to Drake. His face appeared, lines of exhaustion shadowed by the glow of tactical displays. "They are already moving," she said without preamble. "The Zorith have declared blood vengeance. Intelligence suggests 3 warlords are rallying fleets." Drake's expression did not shift. "Good. Let them gather. Better we know where they are than hunt shadows." Celine's tone sharpened. "Do not mistake inevitability for advantage. The council is fracturing. Some races want to withdraw, to appease. Others whisper that humanity provoked this war." He studied her, the weight of silence between them. "And what do you say, Ambassador?" "I say the truth. That humanity did not provoke this war, our enemies did. But if we are not careful, our laughter will be seen as arrogance, and allies will turn away. We must show them it is not madness but resolve." Drake inclined his head slightly. "Then we will show them in the only language the Zorith understand." Their connection ended, but the bond between them remained, a shared understanding that they carried more than just their people's survival. They carried the weight of proving to the galaxy that humanity's fire would not consume indiscriminately. Across the stars, the Zorith licked their wounds and sharpened their blades. In shadowed chambers, warlords wrought promises of vengeance, their voices carrying across fleets. They mocked humanity's laughter, calling it the last gasp of a species doomed by arrogance. Yet beneath their bravado, unease festered. The destruction of their flagship had shattered the illusion of invincibility. For the first time in centuries, they faced an enemy who not only resisted but mocked their terror. On Eridan's surface, as night fell, Celine stood on a balcony overlooking the colony. Fires smoldered in the distance, casting an orange glow against the horizon. Children's laughter rose from below, light and genuine, echoing strangely against the memory of human soldiers chuckling as they fought. It struck her that laughter was not only defiance but contagion. It spread, disarming fear where speeches and treaties failed. She wondered what would happen when the war dragged on, when the cost grew heavier. Would laughter hold? Or would it fracture under grief? Her thoughts lingered on that question as she turned back to her quarters, the council's debates awaiting her, the weight of diplomacy pressing harder than any battle. Above her, the stars glittered cold and distant, each one a potential battlefield. Humanity had stepped into the storm, and there would be no turning back. For now, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. Allies wavered, enemies gathered, and in the midst of it all, humanity laughed, not out of madness, but because they knew the cost of silence. And as Admiral Drake's fleet prepared to move once more, the Council faced its unspoken truth. The thousand-year peace was not broken by alien aggression alone. It was broken the moment humanity chose not to fear. The war spread like a storm across the stars, each system becoming a test of endurance. The Zorith warlords rallied under banners soaked in vengeance, their fleets swelling with conscripts and mercenaries eager to erase the shame of Eridan. Worlds that had not seen battle in centuries now trembled under their approach. Yet wherever they struck, humanity was there to meet them. Admiral Drake's Resolute became a legend in motion, its name whispered in awe and fear. In one campaign, it intercepted a Zorith raiding flotilla near the mineral moons of Kareth. The enemy outnumbered them 3-1, but Drake ordered a feigned retreat, drawing them into the gravity well. There, his fleet wheeled about with brutal precision, slingshotting torpedoes through the moon's pull to strike with impossible trajectories. The Zorith fell apart, their discipline crumbling under the unexpected assault. Survivors fled, carrying tales of human cunning back to their warlords. Celine Vose, meanwhile, fought her battles in the Council's marble halls. Each day, she faced envoys who pressed her with accusations that humanity was too reckless, too unrestrained, that their defiance would doom them all. She countered with steel in her voice. "You fear our laughter," she told them. "But that laughter is the sound of survival. If you cannot find it in yourselves, then you will always be prey to those who demand your silence." Some listened, inspired. Others recoiled, unwilling to embrace a philosophy they did not understand. Yet even among skeptics, seeds were planted. Concord delegates found themselves asking whether they had mistaken humanity's strange resilience for madness when it was, perhaps, their greatest strength. On the battlefield, laughter became more than a quirk, it was a weapon. Human soldiers broadcast their voices across open comms during firefights, mocking Zora threats, chuckling in the face of overwhelming firepower. Enemy morale faltered under the sound, their intimidation turned to ash. For species who had relied on fear as their first strike, it was disarming to meet warriors who turned terror into comedy. One such moment came during the siege of Lytha Station, a Concord outpost targeted for its supply routes. Zorith troops breached the outer defenses, storming corridors with howls of conquest. But as they advanced, human defenders laughed into the comm systems, the sound echoing through every hall. "You're late," one voice teased. "We've already set the table." Explosives detonated moments later, tearing apart the assault squads. Survivors staggered back, unnerved. For them, laughter was a prelude not to weakness but devastation. Admiral Drake heard of these moments and allowed them, though he never encouraged arrogance. In his briefings, his tone was always measured. "Laughter is not a shield," he told his officers. "It is a mirror. It shows the enemy who they are when their power fails them. Use it wisely, or it will betray you." Yet even he could not deny its effect. Reports showed that Zorith forces were faltering faster than expected, their leaders frustrated, their soldiers uneasy. What they had believed would be a war of conquest was becoming a war of attrition, and humanity thrived in such wars. Still, the cost mounted. Human colonies endured raids, and Concord allies bled alongside them. Celine bore the weight of every name etched into casualty lists, even as she argued in chambers for unity. She saw clearly the danger. While humanity could withstand loss, the other species of the Concord were not built for endless sacrifice. If they lost faith, if they fractured, then no number of victories would matter. One night, after another grueling session, Celine stood alone on the balcony of the Council's central spire. The city below was alive with alien lights, a galaxy's worth of cultures interwoven into a fragile whole. She wondered how long it could last under the pressure of war. Her private comm pinged, and Drake's voice came through, gravelly but steady. "You sound tired," he said. "And you sound unbreakable," she answered. "Perhaps we should trade places." His chuckle was low, genuine. "You'd hate command. Too many hours, not enough glory. And you'd despise diplomacy. Too many words, not enough action." The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with mutual understanding. They both knew the war was far from over. Humanity had proven it could fight, but proving it could lead was another battle entirely. Drake finally spoke again, quieter this time. The Zorith think they can outlast us. Let them. Time has always been humanity's ally. We've endured worse, and we'll endure this. Selene closed her eyes, letting his certainty settle over her. Yet she also knew that endurance came at a price. Every battle hardened humanity's image, reshaping how the galaxy saw them. No longer merely one race among many, they were becoming something larger, an idea, a force that could not be ignored. That power could unify the Concord, but it could also isolate humanity if fear outweighed trust. The next day, the Zorith launched a coordinated assault deeper into Concord space, a show of strength meant to erase their humiliation. But they found, again, humanity waiting. Drake's fleets did not merely repel them, they pursued, striking supply lines, dismantling infrastructure, laughing over open comms as they tore through defenses. Reports spread like wildfire, carrying a message louder than any declaration. Humanity would not be broken. The council watched with mixed awe and dread. The Lit-Han envoy whispered, "They are fire given form." The Rulati shook their feathered heads, murmuring, "Fire consumes as well as warms." Selene listened, but she did not correct them. Fire was both, and humanity had always carried it. As the war widened, a realization dawned across the galaxy. The thousand-year peace had not ended simply because the Zorith declared war. It had ended because humanity, after centuries of restraint, had been forced to reveal what lay beneath their calm. And once revealed, there would be no return to the old illusions. On the Resolute, Drake stood with his crew, watching stars shift as the ship entered another contested system. His voice carried across the bridge, quiet but resolute. They wanted war. We will give it to them. And when it's over, the galaxy will know the cost of underestimating humanity. No one cheered. No one needed to. A quiet chuckle rippled across the officers instead, the sound spreading, low and steady, until it filled the bridge. It was not madness, nor arrogance. It was the simple truth of who they were. And somewhere, across the darkness, the Zorith warlords felt the echo of that sound, and feared it more than any weapon. The war reached its crescendo in the Ithran expanse, where 3 Zorith warlords had united their fleets into a vast armada. It was said to be the largest concentration of warships assembled in living memory, a storm of steel and fury that darkened the stars. Their intent was clear, to break the Concord in one decisive blow, to shatter the myth of humanity's laughter and bury it beneath fire and silence. Admiral Drake stood at the heart of his command deck aboard the Resolute, eyes fixed on the shifting tactical display. Around him, his officers worked with controlled urgency, their voices measured even as alarms flared across the screens. The enemy's numbers dwarfed their own, but humanity had long since abandoned the illusion that numbers alone determined fate. "We outgunned 6-1, Ensign Lyra reported, her voice steady despite the odds. Drake nodded once. "Then we'll give them 7 fights." His words were calm, as if the impossible were no more than an inconvenience. The fleet maneuvered into the expanse's scattered debris fields, jagged remnants of ancient celestial collisions. Where others saw chaos, Drake saw cover, opportunities for ambushes and feints. Human ships darted through the labyrinth with uncanny precision, striking hard, vanishing, and striking again. The Zorith pressed forward with brute force, their formations rigid, their commanders bellowing orders that demanded submission rather than adaptation. As the battle raged, Selene Vos addressed the council from a chamber crowded with envoys. The councilors watched live projections of the fight, their faces pale as human warships vanished into fire only to re-emerge from the smoke, grinning voices carried over comms. "Do you see?" Selene demanded, her voice carrying across the chamber. "They do not disobey. They do not yield. Humanity's laughter is not arrogance, it is defiance, and it is victory. If you cannot match it, then at least stand with it." The Lit-Han envoy, usually cautious, leaned forward, crystalline body glinting in the chamber light. "You would have us fight as they do, reckless, unrelenting, laughing into the void." "No," Selene answered. "I would have you remember that fear feeds our enemies. Resolve denies them. Humanity has remembered it all along. You must remember now." Her words resonated, though unease remained. Some envoys saw salvation in humanity's fire, others saw only the promise of a new terror. But none could deny that without them, the Concorde would already be ash. Back in the expanse, the Zorith launched their decisive push. Their armada converged on the Resolute, pouring torrents of plasma and missile fire into the debris field. The void lit up with blinding detonations, human ships straining against the onslaught. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide had turned. Drake stood unmoving, his hands clasped behind his back. "Signal the fleet," he said. "Initiate Laughing Storm." The order rippled outward. Across every human vessel, comms crackled to life, broadcasting not orders but voices, soldiers, officers, even wounded crew members, all laughing. The sound rolled like thunder through open channels, reaching enemy ships, filling their comms with a sound they could not silence. It was raw, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Zorith crews faltered. Their weapons wavered. For a species built on fear, the sound was unbearable, a weapon that gnawed at certainty, corroded discipline, and left commanders raging at shadows. Into that hesitation, Drake struck. The Resolute and its sister ships surged forward, weapons blazing. They tore through the flagship of one warlord, its core erupting in a flare that lit the expanse. Human fighters swarmed like hornets, piercing holes in the vast armada, while torpedoes detonated in cascading sequences that turned precision into chaos. On the council chamber floor, envoys gasped as the projections flared with victory after victory. The Zorith lines buckled, then shattered, ships scattering in all directions. Celine stood tall, her gaze fixed on the flames. "They will not break us," she said softly, though the chamber heard her. "Not now. Not ever." The final blow came as Drake's fleet surrounded the second warlord's flagship. With deliberate precision, they tore it apart piece by piece, until its command bridge was exposed to the void. Humanity's laughter carried across the wreckage as the warlord's last broadcast dissolved into static. The third warlord fled, his armada collapsing in disarray, leaving behind only ruin. Silence fell on the Resolute's bridge as the last enemy ship winked out on the tactical display. The crew stared at their admiral, waiting. Drake exhaled slowly, then nodded. "It's done. Signal the council, the expanse is ours." But victory did not bring triumphal shouts. Instead, quiet chuckles spread through the bridge, soft at first, then stronger, until laughter filled the air once more. Not wild, not arrogant, simply resolute, the sound of people who had met death and turned it aside. In the council chamber, allies erupted in conflicting reactions. Some cheered, tears glimmering in alien eyes. Others recoiled, unsettled by the sound echoing across the feed. Celine stood alone at the center, watching the divide sharpen. Humanity had won, but in doing so, they had revealed themselves utterly. The 1,000-year peace was gone, and in its place stood something new, an age in which laughter, not silence, would mark survival. Later, Celine walked alone through the quiet halls, her reflection trailing beside her in glass walls. She thought of the faces of the dead, of Drake's unyielding presence, of the council's fearful whispers. Humanity had secured victory, but at what cost? Unity, once fragile, now hung by a thread, reshaped by awe and suspicion alike. Drake, too, lingered on his ship, staring out at the wreckage drifting in the expanse. He thought of the laughter that had carried them through, the weapon no arsenal could forge. He wondered how long it would last before grief dulled it, before the galaxy turned it against them. Yet deep in his chest, he knew, so long as one human voice remained, laughter would endure. The war was not over. The Zorith still lived, their rage unquenched. The council still wavered, uncertain of the fire they had unleashed. But something irreversible had happened. Humanity had stepped from the shadows of peace into the blaze of war, and they had not flinched. In the void between stars, where silence reigned eternal, one sound now lingered above all others. It was not the roar of cannons, nor the scream of dying fleets. It was laughter, defiant, unbroken, echoing into the dark. And in that sound, the galaxy knew the truth. The 1,000-year peace had ended, and humanity was ready for whatever came next.